Ben of all trades. Benjamin Franklin's achievements. Founded the first public library. Oh, what a cool guy. Oh my gosh, he's the coolest bifocals. Gosh, wow. He's on a $100 bill. All right. Every once in a while, you come across an overachiever. Someone who's a total workaholic, has like a zillion hobbies, exercises 8 days a week, spends every Saturday volunteering at a homeless shelter, and actually flosses as much as you're supposed to. Don't you just love those people? Well, there is one overachiever to rule them all. His name, Benjamin Franklin. Yep, the dude on the $100 bill. Of course he made it onto the big currency. The guy was baller. Yeah, even in a time when people like Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, and John Adams were multitasking like crazy, Benji's range of accomplishments and contributions is especially mind-blowing. Let's run down the list real quick so you can get a sense of how diverse this guy's interests and talents were. Public libraries. Created them. Founded the first lending library, the Library Company of Philadelphia in 1731. And not once did he ever return a book to his library that was overdue. Lightning rods. He invented them. In fact, inventor Ben patented all sorts of inventions we either still use today or which led to modern inventions. Coal stoves, bifocals, copy machines, and urinary catheters, to just name a few. By the way, we recommend not using all those inventions at the same time. Daylight saving time. Came up with it. So yeah, he's the reason people start grumbling that it's suddenly dark outside when they get off work. The U.S. government improved it, was one of the writers of the Constitution, was a prominent statesman behind many of the nation's founding principles, and held more than a dozen offices, including U.S. Ambassador to France and Postmaster General of the colonies. Electricity made the connection between electricity and lightning. No one knew back then that the two were the same thing. It was all very, shocking. But the list is so long that if he kept rattling stuff off, we'd be here all day. Which is no good because a storm's a-brewin'. But here are just a few more. He wrote Poor Richard's Almanac, a hugely popular publication containing weather predictions, proverbs, and wordplay. Helped found universities, hospitals, and fire departments. Campaigned for civil rights, and still found time to perform his famous high wire act over the Grand Canyon. Okay, that one might have been somebody else. Finally, he wrote an autobiography. Okay, big deal, so did Miley Cyrus. Yeah, but this autobiography is the most popular autobiography in the history of autobiographies. It's the only pre-1800 bestseller that people still read regularly today. Why? Because Ben's life was bonkers. Why wouldn't you want to read all about a guy whose life reads like a Robert Louis Stevenson adventure novel? Okay, so let's do a brief summary of his All About Me book, and then we'll dive in and analyze a part of it. The Autobiography of Benjamin Franklin is divided into 4 parts. Part 1, The Phantom Menace. Here, Franklin starts by explaining why he's writing his autobiography, other than because it's great fun to talk about yourself for hundreds of pages. He gives us a brief history of Ben, describing his early life in Boston, his love for reading, and his job training as an apprentice to his brother James, who was a printer. Yeah, not one of those printers. One of these printers. Benny Boy loved the printing game, but his brother, not so much. So he ran away from home at 16, made his way to Philadelphia, and got a job working for a printer there. He bounced around from job to job, eventually starting up his own printing business, where he prints the Pennsylvania Gazette. Not to be confused with the Pennsylvania Gazelle, which is one of the most graceful creatures in the mid-Atlantic United States. Anyway, Franklin also talks about how he got married to Deborah Reed, a writer who marries a woman named Reed. Oh, the irony. And about how he started up a club called the Junto, where folks got together to debate philosophical and scientific ideas. And you thought he didn't know how to have fun. Part 2, The Prisoner of Azkaban. Ben talks about how he created the library system and then launches into a discussion of morality. He basically says he's not a church-going gentleman, but lives by a strong set of virtues and principles, which he lists. He's not into the whole religion thing, but instead just prays by himself. It still gets the job done, and you don't have to worry about falling asleep in a church pew. So, win-win. Part 3, Ben Franklin, Winter Soldier. Fast forward 5 years to when Franklin writes Poor Richard's Almanac, which becomes super popular. Like, so popular you could reliably find it at any Hudson News on your way through an airport. Well, if there had been airports. But yeah, then he gets into some of his major accomplishments, like founding the first American fire department, founding the University of Pennsylvania, and helping to create the first American public hospital. which was pre-Obamacare, so he was able to avoid any controversy. Because the French and Indian War was on the horizon, Franklin talks about how he tried to unite the American colonies, which worked about as well as trying to get two people to agree on something in a Facebook thread. The colonies decided to remain independent colonies, undeterred. Turd. Franklin threw himself into the war effort, helping a general acquire military supplies and building forts. He's even made a colonel, although his chicken always did pale in comparison to the master. Ben wraps up part 3 by talking about some of his scientific successes, like the totally minor electricity experiment. Part 4, Too Fast, Too Furious. Franklin finishes the autobiography by talking about some tax-related issues that arose between the Pennsylvania Assembly and Governor Denny, and how Ben was able to mediate the matter to arrive at an agreement that was suitable to everyone. Well, to everyone but Governor Denny, who subsequently got the boot from the colonists. And that's how it ends. Probably could have been a grander big finale, but it's tough to be a critic when a book's done as well as this one has. Okay, now let's dip our toe in the water and analyze one section of Franklin's famous work. Why do we care about this dude and what he had to say about himself? Well, keep in mind, everywhere we look, we see some sign that Ben was here. He helped form our institutions, advance our sciences, and forge our government. When we refer to our founding fathers, he's one of those guys who comes immediately to mind. We wouldn't be who we are as a nation without the industrious example set by fellas like Ben Franklin. And then there's the matter of this being the most popular autobiography of all time. What makes it so good? Why are people still captivated by it hundreds of years later? Are the chase scenes really that thrilling? So yeah, go ahead and read section 8. From "It is some time since I received the above letters," until "and not to make apologies for them." Once you're done, come back. Trust me, it's gonna be electric. Alright, so we're here at the beginning of part 2. Where Franklin is writing from Passy, France, located near the neighboring town of Gassy. And he's received letters from a couple of his buddies urging him to keep writing about his life. It's a nice little stroke of his ego, and it does the trick. Now, check out this pro move. Franklin ends the first paragraph by saying, "I will endeavor to recollect and write what I can. If I live to get home, it may there be corrected and improved." That middle phrase, "if I live to get home," is just kind of thrown in there casually, but it creates the ultimate suspense. Right away, he establishes how high the stakes are. He's just writing some silly old book about his life, but he might not live to finish the tale. Chilling. From here, he launches into an explanation of how he established the Philadelphia Public Library. So maybe a little less thrilling than almost certain death lead-in, but he knows how to grab ya. Okay, now look at how he sets up this paragraph. There was not a good bookseller's shop in any of the colonies to the southward of Boston. Those who loved reading were obliged to send for their books from England, and so on. Just like any good story, he starts by establishing the problem. There are Pennsylvanians who would love to get their hands on some riveting literature, but unless they wanted to read their IKEA instructions over and over again, there isn't much of an option. And then, Franklin to the rescue. He and his pals started by collecting and sharing their combined literary resources among themselves, and it worked so well that he decided to expand the idea. Boom, public library. But unlike the best things in life, it wasn't free. He talks about how there was a one-time sum up front and then annual contributions, which of course they needed to import new books and run their little library, and then he describes the snowball effect. You can really see Franklin's writing shine here. In the space of half a paragraph, he goes from one little library to a library phenomenon. The institution was imitated by other towns and in other provinces. The libraries were augmented by donations. Reading became fashionable, and in a few years were observed by strangers to be better instructed and more intelligent than people of the same rank generally are in other countries. The fact that he covers this meteoric rise in the popularity of libraries in such a short span of page space really makes you feel like you're, well, on a roller coaster. A roller coaster without a long line maybe, but a roller coaster nonetheless. We can almost see these libraries springing up like whack-a-moles. People becoming well-read and brilliant at breakneck speed. Brains becoming so full they're ready to burst. And so, Franklin takes a pretty dry topic, libraries, and turns it into a thrill ride. Not an easy task. In the 7th paragraph, Franklin gives us a little insight into how he went from being fairly uneducated to the great brainiac mind he turned out to be, although he puts it a little more modestly. This library afforded me the means of improvement by constant study, for which I set apart an hour or two each day, and thus repaired in some degree the loss of learned education my father once intended for me. Throughout the book, we can see examples of this technique where Franklin gives us multiple bits of information in a single thought. For one, we get that he suddenly had this little place filled with knowledge where he could while away the hours reading and learning. No wonder the guy needed bifocals. But he also tells us a little about his childhood and his relationship with his father. He never got a good education growing up, but his father intended one for him. So now we're picturing this great dad who wants the best for his son but isn't able to provide it. That's a lot of info packed into just one sentence. And check out how much he hops around from one topic to the next. Not in a disjointed way, but just enough to keep it interesting. Like, if he went on for 50 pages about how great his library was, we might be ready to start a book burning club by the end of it. But he jumps from description to the library, to some lighthearted and humorous lines about his relationship with his wife, and then in the next paragraph to his religious beliefs. He segues nicely from one to the next and doesn't try to bore his audience by being overly descriptive or trying to impress people with his awesome vocabulary. There might be a few $5 words in there, but they weren't $5 words in Franklin's time. Yeah, this is kinda how people used to talk, even when texting. Alright, time for you to look over one more section and do a little analyzing yourself. Check out section 9, Plan for Attaining Moral Perfection. This guy liked to set the bar low, didn't he? Read from the beginning of the section down to, I should probably be proud of my humility. As you read, ask yourself some of these questions. When and why does Franklin break from a normal paragraph format? What does this accomplish? How does Franklin make his own spiritual or moral journey relatable to his readers? Do you get a sense Franklin is just relaying his own struggles or trying to impart his wisdom to his readers? Like, is he saying he's got it all figured out and you better hop on the bandwagon to Virtue Town? How does Franklin make use of italics? What does he achieve by emphasizing certain words and phrases? And just in general, what does he do well? How does he hook his readers? What message is he trying to convey? When's the sequel coming out? Alright, read and enjoy. While you're doing that, I'll be working on my own autobiography, Gone with the Wind. Shoot, that one's already taken? Back to the drawing board.